Here's an idea. Let's not get crazy.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Sensible Psychedelics. I'm Wesley Smith, and my co-host here is with me, Karen King. And we have a very special guest today, Miriam Cayo. I'll mention in a moment why. She's a very special guest because she's quite qualified to speak about all the topics we're going to skim over today, with the hope that if she will allow us to have her back on our podcast for deeper dives on each one of these topics, it would be great. She's holds a special place in my heart because she was one of the first facilitators that I experienced in the psychedelic world. And she has been quite an influence on how I think about the medicines, how I think about psychedelics and the role that they can play in transformation. I'm going to read her bio because I don't want to get anything wrong here. So I'm just going to actually read a few sentences straight out of ChatGPT after she analyzed all of your experiences that you've had in this space. So Miriam Grace Cayo, lovely middle name. I love that. She's a PhD and a psychedelic facilitation researcher, educator. She got her PhD from University of Utah. And her dissertation was a series of in-depth interviews with 27 underground facilitators, which I find fascinating, actually analyzing the underground facilitation space. She's been practicing facilitator for over 10 years, working at the intersection of trauma-informed care and psychedelic medicine work. She's the Chief Impact Officer at Pneuma Science, which is an independent research lab, and she leads the Medicine Circle Collective, which is a community of practitioners and seekers. Now, she says that she helped pass the Utah House Bill 390, but I know better. She actually was one of the original people who put it together and got the whole thing started. So she'll be more humble than that and say that she was just one of those who helped, but she was central in the passage of that bill. And that bill advances research in psychedelic assisted therapy. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then last, she published recently an essay, which we will definitely talk about, titled "Not Your Guru, The Radical Ethics of Refusing to Heal Someone." And I love the title. I love how it argues that the facilitator's primary job is to dismantle their own authority rather than to wield it in a facilitation experience. That's just fascinating, the whole concept of self-sovereignty. So with that as an intro, welcome, Miriam. Karen, is there anything you want to add to that, or do you want to jump right into questions?
Well, I would just love to say thank you for coming on. And I think it's just super crucial that we have all voices, like we were saying before we started recording. And so I love the representation of what we're doing here, even with our various roles in the psychedelic world. And so I wanted to ask you what your entry point into becoming a facilitator of psychedelic medicine was. What was happening and what made you choose that path?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be able to share in this way and to collaborate and to discuss what's up right now in this really fast-moving field. When I was in my early 20s, I was just coming out of a pretty traumatic childhood. And from what I could gauge, there wasn't a lot available to me. The traditional pathways for healing, getting a therapist or taking some meds, didn't feel appropriate or even accessible to me. And so it was such a gift. I had a dear friend of mine that gave me some psilocybin. And my experience was so profound. And I was able to, in that experience, see how everything that had happened to me in my life was actually going to be exactly the curriculum that would allow for me to make the difference that I wanted to make, that I hoped to make. And so I was able to have this massive reframe of who I was and how I was showing up and what my capacity was. And after that, I continued to quietly take psilocybin. I would go backpacking and, under a full sky of stars, have a journey. And they usually were by myself. They were very spiritual. but I didn't want anyone to know about them because I didn't want to be breaking a law. And at the time, I felt like it would even be unethical for me to be using these substances. And so over time, I kind of, in the background of my life, had these experiences that were deeply spiritual and connective and supportive of me while I was doing other things. And the other things that I found myself doing were to try to help people. One of the questions that has been deep in my soul has been, what can we do to allow for humans to thrive? And as I was working in community development and humanitarianism, I was doing Peace Corps and putting on service projects. And I kind of made a career out of that. I would always ask myself, like, why are we not talking more about psychedelics when I could see that people were getting stuck in, even if they had all the resources, all of the education, if they had a lot of trauma, which so many of us do, there would be patterns that they weren't able to break from, that I found that psychedelics were really supportive in helping someone with. And so over time, I just started like letting people know, like, I feel like you might be supported with this process if you took a little bit of the psilocybin. And they're like, oh, anyway, it was such a hush hush thing. But I started holding space for people. They would ask me if I would guide journeys for them. And over time, I was like, there's something to this. Like, I was not only changed by it, but I was seeing other people changed by it. And I didn't want to just, passively understand how to work with people in psychedelics. So I started going to all of the shamans I could find, all of these big journeys I could find. And then that led me to getting more training. So I've been, would go through different trainings to learn about how to be a facilitator. And then that's how I made it into the facilitation role. And then I started realizing that we needed a lot more understanding, not just from an underground perspective or a practitioner perspective, but in the research, in the science. And that's how I made it into my PhD program to study psychedelic facilitation. So it's been a really personal journey for me, something that is deeply tied to how we can help humans. And we need a lot of help. And I really do believe that when used well and responsibly, that these powerful substances can make a really big dent in progress and in healing.
Thank you so much for giving us that map. It always strikes me when I talk to people that are so impassioned and powerful in their experience of facilitation, or therapists doing therapy with clients, is the wounded healer aspect, and how that gives us a particular insight and edge into helping others. And once we have an experience of being healed, we want to share it with everyone. It sounds like that was a key piece for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Miriam, I'm fascinated by the dissertation in terms of the interviews with all of these other facilitators. In your research and I know that you have worked with many more than the 27 that were part of your dissertation. Do you see? Could you describe kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of good facilitation, so-so facilitation, really bad facilitation, and what are the characteristics? I guess let's start with your dissertation. What things came out of your research with those 27 facilitators specifically, and then what additional insights do you have from experience with other facilitators that weren't part of that?
Wow. Yeah.
And that's a big question.
It's a big question. Well, I'll first start by saying that the facilitators that I interviewed were from such a diverse kaleidoscope. Each one of them came with different backgrounds, different experience levels, different programs that they went in. Some were more clinical, some were more somatic, some were more shamanic, some were more spiritual. And so it was a whole diverse array of and representation of what I believe is happening in the underground. So yes, there's a large spectrum of different practices. And I would say that there is no right way to do psychedelic work. and that each person has their own way. And that when we try to like cram everything into like, this is the way, this is the truth, this is the narrow path towards transformation, that's where we get into trouble. And so that was one of my big takeaways from this research, is that through all of these different approaches and philosophies and practices with psychedelic facilitation, that it was not mine to say what was, good and bad and ugly in terms of like their approach. But I do think that there is a way to say, what are the golden threads of what can be best supportive for a transformative journey, irrespective of somebody's religion or their spiritual orientation or their experience with psychedelics. And so there are some golden threads, and we can talk more about that. The things I'll start with the ugly, and in terms of like, not necessarily the approach, but in the way, or maybe this is the approach, but it's like the way that somebody is prepared for working with someone else. And I think that if someone hasn't done their own work, they're not going to be able to understand how to work with someone else's. And if they haven't walked their talk, then it's difficult for them to be able to support someone else to walk their talk and to be able to sit in the fire and the discomfort that comes into this space. And so I think that experience is a big part of what makes a good facilitator, is that if they've been able to do this on their own and they've experienced this and they've gone through these processes of learning and growth, that they'll be able to hold that for other people. But even with experience, there are people that they have experiences that go to their head and they feel that they are spiritually superior to others. And when that superiority comes in, it creates a hierarchy of authority where they feel like they have the authority and that the other person doesn't, or the other people. And that can create a cycle that I feel is unhealthy in this space. I feel that one of the main purposes of this work, from my experience and the benefits of this work, is that it helped me, these substances helped me find my own voice and my own alignment and the potential for me to thrive in my own life. And that there can be a temptation for someone who thinks that they have the authority to tell someone who they are, how to experience this, what this experience should or shouldn't be like. And that can be confusing for someone, that can be distracting for someone. And so I would say that that's maybe part of the uglier sides of this work, is that that instead of somebody guiding someone to their own truth, they're taking them towards their own truth, because maybe they want the attention, maybe they want the power, maybe they haven't done enough of their own work to realize that someone else's truth and alignment is just as valid for them as their own truth is for their own life.
I'm really struck by what you're describing as exactly, and of course this makes sense, exactly where therapy and therapists trip up too. Is, if you have a therapist who has not experienced being in the client chair, it's really hard to have an authentic and transformative experience or offer that for a client in the therapy space. And then watching therapists come in, I've been a therapist for 20 years now, that think they have something to teach their clients instead of coming in with the humility of, what can I learn from this experience with the person? It doesn't surprise me that in the sort of the rigid therapeutic model or the more structured therapeutic model and your facilitator model, that they're really similar.
Yeah. And I think it's tricky because as humans, in order for us to survive, we've needed to kind of work with the authorities or the collective, right? And it is kind of a radical divergence for us to reject that authoritative model and to listen to ourselves. And so it's not only part of our survival that we do listen to the authority, the one that has the wisdom, the elder, the teacher, and so that's kind of like cooked into the sauce, I think, of being human. But I think that's made us, it's to the point that it's making us sick. Like if we don't follow our own intuition and we don't listen to ourselves and our bodies, I think that we can overextend permission to our outside world to, guide us where we really should. I don't like the word should, but I would prefer to see that people know how to listen to themselves. And that's something that I think a good guide can help someone do, is to create the conditions that allow for someone to have a deeper experience of their self. But if they know with a capital K, like how it's supposed to be for someone else, then those conditions then are their conditions to help that person find their own or their version of what is supposed to be. And so I think it's really, really tricky to have somebody that anybody, any facilitator, anyone with authority, to live in this space of, I don't know. I know some things. I know a map, a general idea of what this might look like, but I don't know the direction that you're going to take that will help you get to where you want to go. And that, I think, does require so much humility, and it's not celebrated. Humility is not something that we celebrate in our culture. We celebrate confidence. We celebrate being the authority, the one who knows. And so I think it requires a special kind of person to be able to guide with humility.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a whole episode. We're gonna have you back with a whole episode on this very issue. But I do have a follow-up question about this, because given what Karen said about about the approach in therapy and how it's similar with psychedelic, could you describe that? You had mentioned one time to me this notion of imprinting and entanglement, and could you describe how much more prevalent that is in the psychedelic space than in the therapeutic space? Because the medicines, just kind of for those who haven't taken psychedelics yet, what is actually happening experientially with the user of that psychedelic in that moment, and why, and what that does in terms of connecting back to the facilitator?
Oh, yeah. This might even require its own episode too.
It all does.
This is, I think, so important to talk about, because in a psychedelic experience, the metaphor I like to use is, it's like a snow globe that's being shaken up like crazy, and it's disorienting. It actually is collapsing your regular systems of what is, what isn't, what should, what shouldn't be. And that is a beautiful thing, because when we're able to have that disruption of habit or of thought or of belief, we can actually more consciously choose what we want. And so there's this window that opens up because of psychedelics that allows for this fresh look on the world, on ourselves and our relationships. And when there is someone right in front of you that is there as the authority, if they're not careful, if they don't do this in a skillful way, they might accidentally be imprinted on by the person that is open and so vulnerable. Another thing that happens in psychedelics is not just that opening of the mind, but also of the heart. And you can feel deeply connected to everyone because there's this sense of oneness. And for a lot of people, this is one of the most spiritual experiences that they've had. And when the person that is there with them is the one that opened up in their eyes this experience, they might wrongfully attribute this experience to them and their impact. And so I feel like it's also like what happens to a little gosling, when they're born. What they see in front of them is what they imprint the experience to. And so that can be used in my experience, I've seen this happen in incredibly beautiful ways where the facilitator was able to say, hey, no, this isn't me. This is you. I am a reflection of you. And they can kind of walk through so that person doesn't imprint to them, or that they do. I think that imprinting happens a lot. I think it happens more often than not. And so it takes someone to know that, to be able to carefully guide someone through that so that they don't get stuck there. But if the facilitator doesn't know what they're doing, and maybe they like the power trip, and maybe they enjoy having someone just have stars in their eyes for them, they can guide someone down a path that can be really, in my opinion, distracting from that person's own personal or their journey to themselves. And that's where cults get started, where people are very charismatic and confident, and they go into these spaces and they enjoy that energetic, imprinting that happens. And it's something that I would say, if we're not careful in these spaces, I think that is one of the major risks of psychedelic work.
Yeah, that transference, countertransference dynamic in therapy is so much what I'm thinking about when you're talking about this. And this is actually a question I had for you as I was reading your articles and through your beautiful PDF of a biopsychosocial spiritual model, which I really appreciated. The main difference I've seen with ceremonial and underground work, and I don't have a lot of experience participating in it, I have a lot of experience witnessing it as a therapist, seeing other therapists do the underground work. Tell me if I'm wrong here, and maybe it's in particular for each facilitator, but it seems like the amount of sessions prior to the psychedelic experience or the exposure to the facilitator could really diminish that imprinting problem. I'm not saying it doesn't happen simply because of the vulnerability of being in a psychedelic experience, but I've found, like with my ketamine assisted clients, I have to see them like at least 10 to 14 times before I really feel like I can understand the layers of what they're working with, respect their autonomy, help them really refer back to themselves as the primary source of healing. And then we go into this really vulnerable space together. I feel like that's a protective factor against this dynamic. What are your thoughts around that? Is it different in the underground world or?
Oh, I love that. And I love that you spend the time really developing a relationship beforehand. And I think that absolutely is a protector from the imprinting that can happen. Unfortunately, I don't know if everybody has the resources to do that or the ability. I think it's a very, I would say, privileged person that has the luxury of getting to know someone that well before they go in. So while that is a protector, I don't know how reasonable that is to most people. However, I will say that what I think you're pointing to is the de-emphasis on the psychedelic experience itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And more emphasis on the preparation, and on the other side, I imagine the integration as well. And that when a facilitator can have the psychedelic experience be 10% of the pie, and have all of these other practices, have all of these other skill development exercises, relational inclusion, where people are expanding their network. When they're doing more of that as part of the transformative experience, instead of just highlighting just this one experience, that they're going to have, of course, they're probably not going to imprint as much because they don't see that psychedelic experience as being the big thing, right? It's just part of it. But also they've done so much of their own work, kind of allowing for them to invest in themselves and invest in this process more than just in the psychedelic journey, that will lead to what I believe much a higher chance of them actually experiencing the transformation that they're seeking.
Well, and the reason that I raised this particular, and I said we were going to have you back to do a deeper dive, and here we are doing a deep dive now. But as you said, we could have several podcasts just on this issue. My personal experience in this area is rather, I think, unique among this group because I've never been in therapy before. So my first kind of therapeutic experience was in psychedelics. And I was struck and have been struck with the dozens of journeys that I've been on where I've had facilitators. I've been struck by how intimate that space is, and in a good way. The affection, the care, the love that the facilitator has for me or the group of people that they were facilitating for, that I think was an important part of the benefit that I got from the journey and from the experience. And most of those did not involve a lot of prep or facilitation. Most of the prep and facilitation I've actually gotten through my wife, who's a coach, and so she kind of fills in the gaps where the facilitators haven't had programs like that. But it's been interesting to me. I remember one time I was on, I don't know, probably my 6th or 7th journey with facilitator, and I came back home and I was gushing about this facilitator, and my wife was like, "Well, you're in love with her," and I said, "Oh, honey, you're in love with her too," because she had been facilitated by her as well, and we both just kind of laughed about it. But it's that connection that you feel that is leveraged by, or the medicine exaggerates in a big way. And it's very powerful, and it can be very healing, and it can be very positive, but it can also lead to a lot of the things that you're talking about, the cults, or people feeling like, I think a lot of people that end up chasing the high, they're looking for more of those connections because they get that experience in their journey. They connect to other people, whether it's people in the group or whether it's the facilitator, but because they're not doing a lot of the integration and they're not bringing it back into their own sense of self, it leaves them empty. And so they're looking for that in their next journey. And they're always chasing after that experience again, rather than realizing that experience is actually something inside of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I find that too, is that these experiences allow for us to maybe see what might be possible when we don't have all of the blocks and all of the belief systems. And so we connect to other people in a way that to me feels so pure. And it is one of the most beautiful aspects to me of this work, is that you can bring two people from completely different orientations into these spaces, and all of a sudden those differences go away, and they're able to feel a sense of love, like deep, deep love. And so deep love to me is the most powerful medicine. And I know that's a very woo-woo way of putting it, when we're talking about therapy and what's happening in the medical model. But I think that that's the unspoken thing that happens, and that we have to be able to see how that opens people up. And that also, when we don't have a language for it, it might seem like, oh, I feel this love for someone. That means we're in love. That means we need to be in a relationship. That means we need to, and it might not mean any of those things, but just that sense of deep love can be so different and such a unique and powerful experience that it really does shake people up, and it makes them question a lot of things. It might mean that after they felt this love for this facilitator, or even anyone else that's in the journey with them, that, oh, maybe I don't love my wife the way I thought I did, and maybe we need to divorce. And it pushes people into change. But that change, if you're with someone that can help guide that change, like, ooh, let's pause here. Maybe what you're feeling for this one person could be possible with other people. Where are there blocks in this relationship that we can address, so that you might be able to have that with your partner, or even more for yourself? And so I think, yeah, again, the experience level of someone is important. And if they're able to see that this imprinting happens, that this love happens, and that's not negative, that's actually maybe the doorway to conversations and considerations that can actually allow for someone to experience that more in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, because whatever someone is, not always, but whatever someone is experiencing in the psychedelic state is what they are enacting in their lives. And so it's this beautiful meta process, right? When they're projecting this onto you as the facilitator, that you get to help them put it back into, well, let's look at how you do this in your life, and let's unwind that. Yeah.
I love your comment about the when you're making the comment about the you feel the sensation that you feel like you need to get a divorce because you don't have that relationship with your spouse. My second journey was actually a licensed therapist who conducted journey. And he said, before we go into this, you have to promise me that for 6 months, you won't quit your job, leave your family, or do anything dramatic.
Yeah.
And I thought he was joking. So I said, sure, no problem. Of course, after it was a hero's dose of a journey. And afterward I thought, oh, now I know what he means, because it so shakes your world.
Yeah.
You begin to, the ground under your feet starts to shake quite a bit, and you lose that footing, and you need to step back and say, okay, this is an incredible experience, but I need to kind of figure things out now. And it was very good counsel on his part, which leads me into the next question. So integration versus journey. I like to use this metaphor. To me, the journey is the chocolate cake, and the integration is the broccoli. and sometimes the broccoli without the salt and the butter, just plain old broccoli. Could you talk about what the journey is, why it is different from integration, but why, if you don't have integration, that journey, it's almost like, in my view, the journey is so much more powerful when you have the integration, but it's an entirely different thing. It really is broccoli versus the chocolate cake. So I just wondering if you could just describe that in your experience maybe in particular as a trauma-informed facilitator.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, for one thing, without integration, I believe that a psychedelic experience is akin to watching an excellent movie. And you're in the movie and it feels amazing, and maybe you're crying and you're moved and you're touched. And then you get in your car after you're done and you drive home, and it was a beautiful experience, but it didn't actually stick in terms of changing your life. And what we're wanting to do, I mean, at least what I think in the context of this conversation of using these substances for therapeutic value, is that the experience itself of the psychedelic, it can be so illuminating to what is possible. It can be illuminating to kind of a map forward of like, oh, okay, I can see this, I can see that. It is not going to do the heavy lifting of getting you to where you want to go. Only you can do that for you. And I think that it is such a myth in our culture that you can just take the substance and it's going to fix you. It's going to eradicate the pain. You were depressed before, and now you're not going to be depressed. And I really am finding that this is actually quite dangerous. The narrative that we're telling right now around ibogaine, and like, yes, there can be these powerful experiences where it does fundamentally shift you, but it's just an intervention. And in my mind, it's just a peak experience, and a peak experience without the weaving of the insight into our embodied day-to-day life patterns is just insight, and it will go away. It will be diminished. And so we have to think in terms of systems, and you are in a system. What can you do to honor the wisdom that was given to you in your system, considering your context, your culture, your habits, your day-to-day practices, the relationships that you have? How can the insight you were given be brought into those spaces? Because if you don't do that step, then this journey that you experienced will just become a memory. And the experience of that developmental window that happens right after a journey is so profound. Like, we're open and we have this opportunity to rewire. And if we don't understand the important steps of how to rewire and have the gumption to do the rewiring, then we're just going to end up in the same space. And we pull someone out of their system, give them the intervention, and put them back in the same system. Eventually, they're going to just go back to whatever that system's gravitational point was. And so we want to be able to look at, as facilitators, as people that are doing this on our own, like, what choices can we make to honor the experience? And I think that that's the hardest thing to hear. It's not sexy. It's much easier to sell, like, this psilocybin journey is going to change your world and you're going to never go back. Like, that is a really attractive thing for people who are deeply suffering and struggling. And it's just not a complete story. And I feel like it's actually going to eventually hurt people that go into this work thinking that it's going to fix them, that the medicine itself, the substance itself, is the agent of change. No, we have to reframe this. They are the agent of change, and this is only going to support them seeing a different way forward that might help them ultimately get to where they want to go.
What's your advice for facilitators and how much integration to do after a one experience? Do you have groups that meet, or how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on the context, but I would say that giving someone, I think the best integration happens during the screening process. So well before, where someone is carving out time and they're like exercising a muscle for them to create space in their life for reflection, for connection, for, journaling, for whatever it is that helps them ahead of time, so that after the journey, they have that kind of in place already. Groups are absolutely important. Like, we are creatures we're a tribal species, and we really deeply are inspired by the people that we share space with. And so if we can choose carefully, both before and after our journey, who we can talk to, who can be supportive, that's really important. And actually, that's one of the main points that the main findings from my research is transformation doesn't happen in isolation. We work with each other. And if we're able to be really intentional about who we are working with, that will better sustain and also inspire the results that we're hoping for. I would also say that beyond group work and having a personal practice is to know that that there is an aspect of our lives that will always be uncomfortable, and that pain and suffering is a part of the human experience. And that when oftentimes after a big experience that expands us, like psychedelics or any peak experience, there's often a contraction, and that contraction within that discomfort, there are treasures of growth and learning, and that's not something that we're ever going to get rid of. And by just understanding that this is not a linear process, this is a scaffolding process. We learn a little bit, we get hurt a little bit, we expand a little bit, we contract a little bit. And that knowing that, and just having the expectation that that's a part of integration, that's a part of life, can really allow for us to calm down a little bit. It's okay to feel what I'm feeling, even when it's hard, and to make space for that and give permission to that as part of the process of integration.
One of the biggest complaints that I've heard of people who have gone on journeys is how they feel dropped afterward. That maybe they have one integration call, but they feel like they've had this incredible experience and then they're out back on the streets. I was wondering if you could give in terms of so your comments about community and having people that you can share these experiences with is very important. On the integration side, could you give a few recommendations of how people that are in that space, they've gone on these journeys, or they're planning on going on a journey, what they should be thinking about in simple kind of exercises or perspectives around integration? What should they be thinking about during those first few days after a journey, or first few weeks after a journey, in terms of identifying whatever insights they might have had during the journey, and just and how they should be approaching that?
I love that question, Wes. Yeah, well, for one thing, a lot of people that do psychedelic work with a facilitator have this common experience of feeling dropped. A facilitator's work, if anybody were to take a magnifying glass and really look at what a strong facilitator does, it is an immense amount of work to do all of the screening, all of the preparation, everything that's happening in session. And then afterwards, it's almost unreasonable for someone to expect a facilitator to be able to hold them through the entire process. Well, they'll be able to offer them a session or two, but they have to continue to move on because they've got other people they're working with too. And so that's why I think this is a community issue. How can we support each other through this process? And so we can't put all of the pressure on facilitators. It really is something that if you're interested deeply in doing this work, that I definitely would highlight, or emphasize to the people in your life, like how can we do this together? And the facilitator to a certain extent too, they probably should have some resources available. But beyond that, I would say that one of my favorite aspects of integration is making meaning of what happened. And a lot of times in an experience, there will be ineffable parts of it that don't yet have words, and that part of being human is to figure out how to understand what that is and to put it into words. But I think especially in the Western world, we tend to quickly want to make sense of everything and have answers like, what did that snake mean? What did this thing mean? What did that? And sometimes like we don't get to know that. Sometimes it just is something that happened, and that the more we sit with it and don't jump to conclusions about the meaning of it, or allow for the meaning to evolve over time. Like the snake could have meant, this thing that you're afraid of at first, and then all of a sudden it could mean the thing that's shedding, and it can mean something that's protective. Like it might have multiple meanings, but that integration really takes, in my opinion, it's a two-part equation. The first part of the equation is making meaning and determining what the insight actually is. And then the second part is to like embody that into weaving it into our day-to-day lives. And that requires more of, I think, what we do really well in our culture, which is to write down our strategies and what are our goals and how are we going to do this each day. We have our lists, we have our ways of perceiving the insight so that it can make sense to how we can actually change our lives with it. And I think that it's not a linear process, and then we're dancing with different components always, and meaning changes, and our strategies of how to implement that insight into our lives change as well. But that giving ourselves permission to really like slow down the process of making meaning and really sit with what happened. Sometimes people will have really clear insight, like I need to forgive my brother, and that will just hit them like a lightning strike, and there's no question about it. And so then there's not so much of a meaning making around that one. It's not nebulous. It's not as abstract as some other messages might be. And in that case, all right, well, how can I get to a point where I can forgive my brother? And maybe it's that for somebody, maybe they need to start forgiving someone that's not as a heavy hitter. Maybe they forgive Starbucks that gets their name wrong, or the person that cuts them off in the street. Like maybe they take these baby steps to getting to a place where they can honor that insight. But I think without that critical time where someone actually does that, like that they are in the mud with it, they're sitting with it, they're trying to make sense of it. Like without that, like I feel like they risk just moving on with their lives. And especially in our busy culture, we tend to have our ceremonies on a Friday, and then on a Saturday we're back, or you know what I mean? It's just like we don't make a lot of space for the meaning making and that processing. And so my best advice on this would be to make space for a very non-linear process, and to do what you can to, in the smallest ways each day, change your habits so that they can honor that insight.
I always think of this process, you said that so beautifully, as it's like managing grief. And when someone says, what can I expect when I grieve? It's like, whoa, that is so different for every person. And it will work on you over years, and you will have a different relationship to it every single day, if not every hour. I feel like integration is the same sort of animal that we're contending with. I had a question for you, just to shift sort of to the outside world. We've been talking about the intra of the psychedelic experience. I'm curious what motivated you to work on this state level change and the bill that is being worked on or passed in Utah. What inspired you?
Yeah, well, let me share a little bit about the bill. So it's House Bill 390. in Utah. And what the bill does is it allows for the state to financially support a clinical trial that is run by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. And they're going to be studying how psychedelic therapy works with a veteran population. And this is just a very small scale study. It's really mostly looking at the safety that's here. And, you know, should things work out with this study, it will open up doors for future research. And one of the reasons that my colleague Anya and I really believed in this work with research first is because what we were seeing happen throughout the country were these initiatives to allow for access. And even here in Utah, there was a bill that a couple of years before, you know, said that, you know, the hospital and the University of Utah, Intermountain and the University of Utah could work with psilocybin and MDMA. And it was like they were getting access before there was enough research to be able to determine what population to work with, what the impacts were. And so for us, we really felt like the most safe and responsible approach to this is to study it and to really, you know, understand how it's working or not working so that we can build on that as we integrate psychedelic care into our systems. And so how it came about is actually a really beautiful story. And in the interest of time, I'll just kind of hit the headliners. But Anya and I had been working on an assessment tool trying to understand what was going on in real world settings, because we knew that in clinical settings that they're very different. They're sterile, they're very protocoled, and the majority of people are not going to be taking psychedelics in that setting. And so we put together a tool that was looking at multiple aspects of someone's health and well-being, not just their symptoms or the pathology or the depression or anxiety, but also like their connection to themselves and to others. And so anyway, we crafted such a beautiful tool, and we were sending it out to people that were working with substances. And there was this group up in Canada that was working with 5-MeO-DMT. And the way they were working with it is that it was titrated, meaning that instead of having someone take a large dose, a hero's journey of whatever the substance was, they slowly worked their way into the peak experience so that there was more autonomy, so that they were able to choose when they were ready. And that, again, was allowing for them to listen to themselves, not the authority, but to their own systems of, am I safe enough to go a little deeper? And as they were able to say yes to that, they felt safer. And as we understand from human development principles, the safer someone feels, the deeper that they can go. And we were like, this is a powerful way of doing this work. Also with 5-MeO-DMT, it's very short. You can actually have an entire session in under an hour, which we believed could be more feasible in our medical model than psilocybin, 4 to 6 hours, or MDMA. We were like, what are we going to do to actually bring something to communities that are desperate for this type of care that could actually fit into our medical model? And so in December, this last year, we were sitting around a coffee table with dear friends, and we were like, if we could do anything, and we had this opening we had this opportunity and connections in the Utah State Legislator, or with Utah State legislators, that we were like, we were given this opportunity to kind of share our opinions on what we would pass if we could pass anything. And we decided that if we could do anything, we would like to explore 5-MeO-DMT, the titrated method, which is much more trauma informed, with the veteran population. And in Utah, our veterans have some of the highest suicide rates of any in the country. And we just felt like this was such an underserved population. And we already had connections with veterans here. And we were like, let's see if we can put all of these pieces together. And so we pitched this to the legislators. Jen Daly Provo, she was amazing. She was like, let's go. We did a bunch of research. We pitched the bill. She took it and ran, and I was able to get bipartisan support. This is going to make me cry. It was so beautiful. We didn't know who would run this bill. We went to the University of Utah, And, they agreed that they were going to support this, and they brought it to the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. And we had people that we knew there, Ben Lewis, who was just an excellent researcher and clinician. And we were like, this is possible for us to have the most perfect ingredients, the most perfect people. Matthew Butler, a leader here in the veteran community, that we brought all together, and it was like a dream team. And what we thought was going to have a lot of pushback in the legislature didn't at all. We had only 2 people in the House of Representatives that didn't vote for the bill. Otherwise, it was completely unanimous. And we were just like in complete shock, because it was like the right thing at the right time with the right players. And we had the right research. Anya had experience helping draft legislation in Texas for similar projects. And we were just like, okay, this is going to happen. And it is happening. And right now, they're working at the University of Utah at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute to put this bill together. And it's one of the first of its kind, studying 5-MeO-DMT, we hope, if we can find a manufacturer, in this format of doing the titrated work. And we are also ensuring that, and this is a really important part, that it's not just the intervention, the psychedelic that we're working with. We're also ensuring that there is psychotherapy beforehand and afterwards. And so that is a really important aspect of this bill, is to know that, and from our personal experience, what we've seen, what we've witnessed, is that it's really important that it's not just substance, that we emphasize that's an important part, but everything else is what's actually going to be supportive of transformation in the long run.
Yeah, I loved that. Wow, what a story. Whew. It's so inspiring to think that the vision that you had could just come through and reach the right people. It gives me so much hope for safety, but also really serving the people that need it the most. Are you going to be a facilitator on the project, or was your role visionary, or do you get to be practitioner?
I would absolutely love to be one of the facilitators, but we don't yet know all of the pieces. And I'm sure that down the road there'll be more opportunity for that. But for now, I think my role is cheerleading and trying to work with other. Anya and I are trying to work on another bill. That we're trying to do these high level projects with even the federal government. We just have worked with Senator John Curtis to see if there might be possibility for us to run a bill that would allow for the VA to cover psychedelic therapy for veterans, so that by the time some of these the FDA approves some of these medicines to be used, that we actually have a framework to allow for people to get access, because they're going to be pretty expensive. And so we're trying to look ahead down the road to see what the bottlenecks might be, so that we can address those sooner than later, as everything's happening so quickly in the field.
Karen, I was laughing when you asked her that question, because Miriam has shared with me experiences that she has had in the clinical space historically, and we'll have you back on for a deep dive into that, because it's a great story and rather hilarious. So we had 14 questions for you. I think we've gotten to 3 of them, and we're probably closing in on the hour. So we're definitely going to have you back if you'll come back on our show. And Karen, unless you had any other questions, I thought we could just finish up asking the 2 questions we'd like to ask to all of our guests. And by the way, you are the OG guest, Miriam. You are our first guest, given the fact that we've only been running this podcast for 2 weeks. You're the very first one. So when we have 10,000 viewers, you can say, I was the first guest on that show. The 2 questions that we want to ask all guests are the following. What about the movement do you like the most? When you just kind of think of the psychedelic movement writ large, what do you like the most, and what most concerns you? And so you can answer those in whatever order you'd like, or not answer either one.
Yeah, those are great questions. What I like about the movement is this bottom up way that humans have found medicine for themselves. And that with or without government sanctions or laws or support or ethics or all, the morality of it, that people are making these bold steps to find the things that are healing for them. And that I love that. I think it really disrupts a lot in our system, and rightfully so. We have a lot of structures and systems and processes that I feel like we do need to address and look at. Like, why are we suffering so much as a society? And I think that this work really opens up possibilities for us to explore the answers to that in ways that are not top down, that are very much bottom up. And I love that. I love that the industry is filled to the brim with all sorts of different types of practitioners that are doing things in such diverse ways. And I love that diversity. I deeply appreciate the way that this work has survived, even though, we might not have overground research on it. People have been working with these substances for millennia, and we continue and will continue with or without any permission. And I love that. It's like this revolutionary act of self-love. And I just admire that. It's courageous. It's not popular. It's beautiful to me. It is like the best of, I think, the human spirit. And I love that. So what I don't like about this work and what scares me about this work is that we have cultural patterning and belief systems that are really hard for me to see how we can use these substances to their potential when we have ideas like go big or go home and quick fix and the monetization of this work and the capitalization of this work and who makes the choices about this work. And so I think that my fears are actually just the opposite side of what I love about this is what happens when the wrong people in power have access to such powerful substances. And I really hope that we don't put this work in a box. It, for one thing, won't be in a box. Like, even if we try, this work is not something that we can have clear protocols on. We can do our best, but we're touching on levels of consciousness and unconsciousness that we don't have great tools for. And I think that as we grapple with that and we try to work with that, I hope that the best of humanity can shine through. But my fear is that it will become another agent of divisiveness, and that we're going to have people in camps that are fighting for power. And I think that it brings out, just like anything, any tool, the capacity for us to misuse a tool. And, in my opinion, these are the most precious substances, or some of them that we have access to, and that we can use them for incredible good, and we can also use them for the opposite. And so my hope and prayer and desire in this work that I'm doing, and with you as well, is to have these types of conversations so we can illuminate and shine light on the ways that we can do this well and the ways that we need to be protective and careful so we don't harm people and actually stunt our growth and evolution.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you. It's been a real delight having you on our first of many podcasts where you will be a guest. Where can people reach you? Find out about the Miriam Cayo that I know.
Miriam Cayo, yeah. So I have a website where I've been publishing just these short little articles, but also I'll have more about my dissertation research and about my community initiatives. And it's just miriamcayo.com, miriamkaiyo.com. And also, I love collaboration, and people can just directly connect with me if they're interested.
Okay, excellent. And we'll put those in the show notes. I found out, Karen, they're called show notes, not publication. I said publication notes last time. I'm just learning this stuff as I'm going along. So we will put that information in the show notes so that people can get in contact you directly. Any last words, Karen?
Miriam, I'm just really in awe of your transformation yourself and what you've done with the work that you do and how you're facilitating it for others. And you're inspiring. I'm really glad that I got to meet you here, and I want to keep talking.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that this just opens up so many doors for you both. Such an exciting thing that you're doing, so needed to bridge what I believe is, the right and the left, the science and the spirit. And I think you guys are doing a phenomenal job at that.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.